More recently, Professor Giorgio de Santillana of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, he's now also deceased, did wonderful work on the astronomical content of ancient myths, the amazing discovery that in some of the oldest myths relating to global cataclysms that have come down to us from remote prehistory, that in those myths is found detailed astronomical information relating to the phenomenon that I'll be discussing a little bit during this talk, known as precession of the equinoxes. Professor Charles Hapgood, whose Earth crust displacement theory and whose work on ancient maps, again, provides a clue to this lost civilization that exists way back in our past, and I'm quite sure that it does exist. And more recently, Rand and Rose Flemath, who've refined Charles Hapgood's theories of Earth crust displacement. And John Anthony West, a great man who spent 20 years trying to draw the attention of Egyptologists to the erosional features of the Great Sphinx and the implications of that erosion. And of course, my friend and colleague, Robert Bauval, with whom I have co-authored the new book, Keeper of Genesis. Robert's astronomical work on the Orion correlation between the pyramids and the three stars of Orion's belt is, in my view, the single most important breakthrough in this field, which has enabled the pyramids, mute for 4,500 years, to speak again and to speak in a comprehensible manner. I don't propose in this talk that I'm going to give on fingerprints today to go at all into the astronomical work that Robert and I present in Keeper of Genesis, because Robert will be doing that when he talks about Keeper of Genesis. But take it from me, the astronomy is really the key to this whole mystery. It's a way that some ancient people long ago, far more sophisticated and civilized than our historians would ever give credit for, found a way to communicate with the future, a way to wake up dormant memories in all of us, memories of that great golden age of mankind that is recorded in all our ancient myths. I'll start this talk just by looking at a few similarities, a few connections, bearing in mind what I said about Walter Emery and the theory of a remote third-party civilization. Let's extend that out from just the Middle East, from Egypt and Sumer, and let's look at connections between Egypt and the Americas, similarities that are ignored by scholars but are not explained by them. One issue concerns the face of the Great Sphinx, which we're looking at here. Robert and I are of the view, along with many of our colleagues, that the head of the Sphinx was recarved by the dynastic Egyptians, that the monument is many thousands of years older than the beginning of historic Egyptian civilization, and that it was probably originally lion-headed as well as lion-bodied, and that heavily eroded, millennially ancient leonine head was recarved into the face of a god by the early pharaohs of Egypt, perhaps at around 2500 BC, when Egyptologists think that the monument was actually created. What I want to draw attention to here is just a small point. It's pretty clear and well established that we're looking at the face of an African individual here, an African head. And I'd like to compare that with this African head, which is roughly the same size as the head of the Sphinx. It's an enormous piece of sculpture. When you stand beside it, it towers above you, and it weighs about 40 tons. The only problem with this African head is that it doesn't come from Africa at all. It comes from the Gulf of Mexico, and indeed was disinterred from the oldest archaeological strata in the Gulf of Mexico, in which it had been deliberately buried at around 13 or 1400 BC. We can say that it was buried then because organic material found alongside it has been carbon dated to that period. But I suspect the scholars may be making a mistake when they attribute this so-called Olmec head, the construction, the carving of the head, to that same period of, say, 1400 BC. It's a mistake in logic to assume that the head dates from the same period as the organic material that was buried with it. It's equally possible that it could have been a vastly ancient heirloom, a venerated treasure that was passed down over thousands of years until the time when this mysterious Olmec civilization, the supposed mother culture of Central America, also venerated it and buried it. I'm intrigued by the similarities of features between the face of the Sphinx and the face of this head. And by the way, we know nothing at all about the Olmecs. Not a single Olmec skeleton has ever been found. It's just a name that is applied to them. They're one of those mysterious high civilizations of antiquity, the origins of which are quite unknown. This also is an Olmec artifact, whoever the Olmecs were. And again, just on this theme of light similarities, I'd like to draw attention to the headdress that the figure is wearing, and to compare it with this headdress from Egypt. This is a 5th dynasty statue found at Saqqara, and I'm intrigued by the similarity of the headdress, because we're looking at cultures that are not supposed to have been in contact at all. 5th dynasty Egypt in 2300 BC and the Olmecs in 1400 BC, or perhaps much earlier than that. So how do such similarities come about? Is it just a coincidence? Was there a contact between these two areas at that time, or could we be looking at the influence of a remote third-party civilization? This piece of sculpture is from Uxmal in the Yucatan, and it's associated with the Maya. And as you can see, it's a double feline figure, two pumas or leonine animals back to back. Again, we find a very similar device in ancient Egyptian iconography, two lions back to back, often joined at the hip, two lion sphinxes back to back, as here on this stela that stands between the paws of the Sphinx. Let's see if I can get that sharp. They were called the Akeru, the gods of yesterday and today. And this device of placing two felines back to back, again, in my view, is too similar to the device found amongst the Maya to be written off entirely as a coincidence. Here we're looking at a piece of architecture from the Inca area. Let me just try and get this sharp. It's so difficult for me to see with all these lights on me. What I want to draw attention to here is the way that the block wraps around the corner. This is a supposedly Inca wall just north of Cuzco in Peru. And the blocks form a kind of L shape as they wrap around the corner, an unusual architectural device. We find exactly the same method